All right, today we're diving into the world of B.F. Skinner. You've probably heard the name. He's a psychologist whose ideas about human behavior were, well, they were so out there, so radical, that they've been sparking arguments for decades. And right at the very heart of all that controversy, there's this really disturbing rumor, one that involves his own daughter. Yeah, this is the question. The one that's haunted his legacy for, what, decades now? Did B.F. Skinner really, truly raise his own daughter in a box? Treating her like one of his lab animals? It's this powerful, kind of horrifying image of a cold, detached scientist, and man, has it stuck around. But is it true? What's the real story here? So on one hand, you've got the myth, right? This image of a cruel, heartless experiment. But then, on the other hand, there's the reality. And the reality is an invention born not out of cruelty, but out of care. It was actually an attempt to build a safer, a healthier world for his child. So to really get a handle on who Skinner was, we've got to peel back the myth and find the man. Okay, so let's just debunk this thing once and for all. The device everyone talks about, it was never, ever a Skinner box for a human. It was an invention with a much, much gentler name. It was called the baby tender. So what was the baby tender? Well, think of it like a high-tech, climate-controlled crib. Seriously, it had this big window, a constant supply of fresh, warm air. It was designed to be a totally safe environment, both physically and, psychologically. The whole idea was to free up parents from some of that constant, tedious labor of early childcare. And yeah, his daughter, Debbie, she actually used it for 2.5 years. And when she finally outgrew it, well, in a move that is just classic B.F. Skinner, he turned it into a pigeon cage. You can't make this stuff up. And this baby tender, it was really just one chapter in what was a truly wild and unconventional career. I mean, you go from his foundational book on behavior back in '38 to a top-secret project during World War II developing, get this, pigeon-guided missiles. Yeah, you heard that right. He was always pushing the boundaries. And by 1948, he's publishing novels about utopian societies. This guy's work was provocative from the absolute beginning to the very end. All right, so now that we've kind of cleared the air on that whole baby-in-a-box myth, we can finally get to the core of Skinner's actual work. Because it was never really about the box itself. It was about the science that inspired the box, what he called the science of consequences. Now, Skinner didn't just pull these ideas out of thin air. He wasn't working in a vacuum. He was actually building on the really bold claims of other psychologists, like John B. Watson. Watson famously said, "Give me a dozen healthy infants, and I'll guarantee I can train any one of them to become any kind of specialist." I mean, that's a huge claim. And that is the very essence of radical behaviorism, this belief that our environment, our world, is the ultimate architect of who we become. And this is a really key point about Skinner's work that a lot of people miss. He never, ever denied that we have thoughts and feelings. Of course we do. He just argued that they weren't the cause of our actions. His whole thing was, for psychology to be a real science, it had to focus on what you can actually observe and measure, right? You can't put a feeling under a microscope, but you can definitely observe and measure a behavior, and that was his entire focus. So his entire theory, really, the whole shebang, it all hinges on one single, incredibly powerful concept: operant conditioning. And the idea is actually pretty simple. It's that what happens after we do something is what determines whether or not we'll do it again. That's it. The consequence is everything. So, okay, how does this actually work? How does this shaping happen? What are the actual tools that operant conditioning uses to mold what we do? Well, it really boils down to a super simple 3-step process. First, you have a behavior. Anything, really. Second, a consequence follows that behavior. Could be a reward, could be a punishment. And third, that consequence directly changes how likely you are to do that same behavior again in the future. Skinner argued that this simple loop, this is the engine that drives all learning. But Skinner saw this engine working on a much bigger scale too. He said there are really 3 major forces that shape all of human behavior. The first is natural selection, our deep evolutionary programming. The second is the cultural practices of whatever society we happen to be born into. And the third, the most personal one, is our own unique history of reinforcement, all the little rewards and punishments we've experienced throughout our own lives. Okay, to really get this, we have to be super clear on the terms because they can be a little tricky. Positive reinforcement is when you add something to a situation to increase a behavior. Think about giving a dog a treat when it sits. Simple. Now, punishment in this context is when you add an aversive event to decrease a behavior, like, say, scolding a child for drawing on the wall. See? One encourages, one discourages. And this difference between reinforcement and punishment, it was absolutely crucial for Skinner, especially when he started thinking bigger, about society as a whole. And, well, he had some pretty radical ideas about which one of these tools we should be using and which one we should probably just throw away. Okay, so Skinner was deeply critical of punishment, and not just for moral reasons, but for a really practical one. He thought it was just plain inefficient. He argued that all punishment really does is teach you what not to do, but it never shows you a better alternative. And even worse, it creates all these nasty side effects like fear, anxiety, guilt. Think about it. A kid who gets punished for teasing someone might stop teasing, sure, but have they learned how to play nicely? No, they've just learned to be afraid. So, if Skinner was so against punishment, what was his alternative? I mean, what's the other option? This is where things get really big. This is where he takes his principles and applies them to all of society. And trust me, this is where his ideas get truly, truly radical. He actually wrote a novel about it called Walden 2. And in this book, he basically sketched out a blueprint for a perfect society, a utopia. He imagined a community that was completely engineered from the ground up around the principles of positive reinforcement. His belief was that if you could just carefully design the environment and all its consequences, you could literally build a world full of happier, more productive people, and you'd never, ever need to use punishment to do it. And this whole grand vision, this new society, it all comes back to those three big forces we talked about: our personal history, our evolution, and our culture. For Skinner, these weren't just abstract ideas for a textbook. No, he saw them as actual, tangible levers you could pull to literally engineer a better world. You know, this leads to what might be one of Skinner's most challenging ideas of all: his complete rejection of traditional morality. He basically argued that no one is born good or evil. Those are just labels we slap on behaviors. To him, an altruistic person is just someone whose environment has consistently rewarded them for being altruistic. A cowardly person? Someone whose environment has reinforced cowardice. For Skinner, it was all a product of your history, not some kind of inner character. And that brings us to the big, unsettling question that sits right at the heart of all of Skinner's work. If everything we do is just the end result of our genes, our culture, and a lifetime of rewards and punishments, then how much free will do we really have? I mean, are we really the architects of our own lives? Or are we just kind of responding to all the forces that have shaped us? That's the question Skinner leaves us with, and it's a tough one.